Welcome all. Thank you so much for being with us today for this second webinar in the series on management research, evaluation, or quality. Today's session devoted to get the voice of university presidents and deans of management schools heard from around the world. So I will be sharing some slides for the introduction. Just let me say that we are going to have one of the panelists speaking in French, as we at IFSAM are quite sensitive to issues of linguistic diversity. And Professor Weffe Kilif has agreed to translate, although she's not a professional translator. She has kindly agreed to translate Professor Salma Damak's speech. So when the time comes, you might see, or actually you might see already the French option for the interpretation right next to the reactions button. If there is any issue that you face in terms of being able to hear us or the translation when Professor Damak speaks, please feel free to use the chat. So the chat is also in vehicle for comments and questions right from the beginning, and then Professor Devraj Adhikari and myself, who are co-chairing the session, will kind of select the questions and bring them to the panelists. So as I was saying, this is the second webinar of this series on management evaluation. And before telling you, basically, I already kind of went very quickly through the kind of sequence, but I would like to mention that Professor Devraj Adhikari, who is co-chairing this session with myself, is the Nepalese Academy of Management president, and he's also a member of the IFSAM Council. We'll have the initial speeches of panelists between 5 and 6 minutes each that we will sequentially introduce Devraj and myself. Then we'll probably have a dialogue among the panelists, and we'll take the questions, as I said, which we encourage you to write in the chat so we can make already an idea about the questions that might be brought to the discussion. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to close, which again, series of the this webinar that we started on January 29th. And just to tell you a little bit about IFSAM before we start with the webinar series, as you might know, IFSAM is the International Federation of Scholarly Associations of Management. It currently has 18 members, 2 of which are observers, and we cover pretty well the world, I said the continents, but obviously there are efforts that we are undertaking, a broader representation of the different academies of management in the world, which are these days both national, regional, and international, and with a very broad sense of management, not only in a, let's say, narrow meaning, but including all the fields in business administration, HR, finance, accounting, and so on. And so we are very pleased that today we can, display this graphical coverage, including the for the Tunisian Association for Accounting from obviously Tunisia. And we have both its president, Salma Damak, and vice president, Weffe Kilif. So this is the current member of the Federation. And just to remind you a little bit, for those of you who are not so familiar, what is the mission of this federation, which was created 30 years ago? The mission, as the statutes establish, is to advance business and management, as I said, in a very broad sense, research, teaching, and practice throughout the world. This mission, the founders actually declined or kind of developed into more specific goals to provide direct benefits not only to the member associations, but also their own individual members. And I would like to mention here some of these specific goals: the encouragement of the established associations of management in some countries, which is still an issue 30 years later. And we are trying to help some colleagues in different countries in Africa to do so. But I would say that also currently we face a big challenge, the online transition situation, which is the actual maintenance or survival of many of these associations, which have had to move to online activities, and it's affecting, as you all know, their finances. To promote linkages and exchanges of associations and support their internationalization, and these gatherings are also obviously an opportunity to strengthen, to create and strengthen these linkages and exchanges of information. But also, and this is probably the point relevant for today and this webinar series, is to establish and maintain standards of competence in these areas, in these three areas of management: research, teaching, and practice. And this is something that the Federation is paying more attention currently, devoting actually 3 new standing committees to these issues and to develop position papers on these issues. And this webinar series exemplifies this concern based on research, given that we're thinking about how do we go about evaluating the quality of management research. And just to point out that when we talk about standards of competence, we don't mean one size fits all. Precisely, also, if you go to the website and read the statutes in detail, you'll find that we talk about taking a contextualized perspective. So this webinar series, of which today we have the second session, is triggered by the FT50 list survey that you might have, probably you are very aware with, which came out in late November, early December. And we thought that the Federation was particularly well placed to become a platform for a dialogue among different stakeholders about this broad issue, not just trying to answer the FT survey, but take it as an opportunity to reflect how we actually think about management research evaluation. So as you might have seen in the panelists of today and of the first session on January 29, we try to give voice and engage with really different perspectives from different people in different parts of the world. In this case, about this issue, what is the situation about management research evaluation? First of all, how is research defined? What are the different kinds of publication formats which are considered in the different national and regional environments? What are the current systems and practices? How well are these systems performing? And based on that, what are the necessary, if any? We have conceived this series as a series of 5 webinars, 1 per month. The first one, as I said, was on January 29th, which had, as we will shortly see, kind of a broad representation of the stakeholders. But then we realized that 1 was not enough and that we probably needed to devote 1 more for each of the stakeholder groups. And so that's what we're doing. Today, we're dealing with university presidents and deans of management schools, which were clearly identified on the first webinar as a very central group influencing what are the practices and the standards put in place for management research. We will have another one on the 26th of March with editors-in-chief of journals and editors of publishing houses across the world. I'll show you a bit later in more detail. A 4th one with governmental in charge of management evaluation on the 23rd of, and we'll end up on the 20th of May with the final closing one, in which we will also have representation of top managers and bodies representing practitioners. The president of the European Foundation for Management Development, EFMD, Eric Cornuel, has already confirmed, such as also Professor Michael Barzilai from the London School of Economics. And we try to dialogue across these webinars. And the way to facilitate this is not just posting the video and the chat on our website that some of you, I know that you have watched, but also to summarize some of the insights in the new publication of IFSAM, the conversation letters that you can access. And there were 2 articles already published for the first webinar. As I said, this series will close on May 20th. We attempt to have represent each of the different stakeholders and to come up with an IFSAM Council position. The Council will meet previous to this on May 10th to draft a position that we hope to actually announce on May 20th. So the first webinar, as you know, had a broad representation of different stakeholders with different members of the community representing both editors of journals, deans, vice chancellors, and also very importantly, Andrew Jack, the global higher education editor from Financial Times, who is also author of one of the articles in that first conversation letter. Just before moving to today, just to quickly announce the next webinar, the third webinar, and this will be the panelists. As you can see, again, a broad representation across the world from editors-in-chief of open access journals, as well as editors of more traditional journals and editors from publishing houses in different parts of the world, including Australia, the UK. So I guess now we can move to today's webinar. And we have this set of panelists, which we will be introducing. I guess next we'll start with ID, right? So Devraj, if you want to proceed with introducing our first panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. So good evening, good afternoon to all distinguished panelists and the participants in this IFSAM second webinar on management research evaluation with university president and management school deans across the world. So today our the first panelist, Idealine E.D. Kastner. She is from USA, Dean at Kelley School of Business, Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana, United States. She has huge expertise in corporate board of directors, chief executive succession, corporate governance, mergers and acquisition. She earned her MBA and doctorate at Kelley, became dean in May 2013 after holding several leadership roles at the school. Prior to her appointments as dean, she chaired Kelley's full-time MBA program from 2003 to 2006 and the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship from 2006 to 2009. And she co-directed the school's consulting academy from 1996 to 2003. From 2009 until her appointment as interim dean in October 2011, she was associate dean of Faculty of Research. Welcome, Professor Idealine E.D. Kastner.
Thank you.
She's the first panelist.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my slides here. So let me just get those up and make sure. Can you see those? Yes? All right. Yes. Thank you so much. So thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I'm really honored to be alongside such a distinguished panel. It's really a great honor for me. For context, I want to briefly describe my school. The Kelley School is part of a very large public university. We have more than 12,000 business students, 30 different degree programs, and approximately 400 full-time and part-time faculty located on 2 campuses. More than half of our faculty are tenure track, and they are extremely research active. I'm also privileged to serve on the board of AACSB International, the Association of Advanced Collegiate Schools of Business, which of course is a key accrediting body for business schools worldwide. So let me first of all, thank the panelists. Sorry, I'll go back to this slide just for a moment. Thank the panelists of the first IFSAM webinar for a very enlightening discussion. I enjoyed watching it very much. As will be evident, there are many points from that webinar which I agree with wholeheartedly, and I will certainly reinforce. During my few minutes, I'm going to make 5 different points. First of all, the identification of quality journals plays a very important role both historically and currently in projecting and protecting the legitimacy and reputation of business schools. Second point is that journal quality is an important metric used by both school administrators and individual faculty members, but the existing journal list is an incomplete view of research productivity, and journal quality rankings should not be confused with measures of research value or impact on society or business. And then my last point is that rankings can be very misleading. Therefore, we must be extremely careful when and how journal lists are used, especially when characterizing schools and the resulting overall school rankings. Now, I want to be very clear that I'm not arguing for or against any specific journals on the FT list. Like others on this webinar and the previous webinar, I get solicited often by my faculty at my school, by administrators at other schools, and journal editors to vote to include certain journals on the list. Every dean knows that such solicitations can be self-serving, and therefore that's not my focus. Rather, I'll speak about journal rankings generally, the good and the bad. Now, as was pointed out in the very first webinar, there is a very long history behind the rise of research in business schools. The image of business schools as trade schools with poor quality students and no legitimate theoretical constructs to be taught was not that long ago. It was common for other university units to dismiss professional schools, especially business schools. And so business schools collectively work to legitimize our discipline. Using the same approach as peers in the sciences, we use scientific methods to study business constructs taught to our students and used by business practitioners. And so legitimacy grew over time. Yet I'm certain business school deans can still cite examples of when peers in non-business units have been dismissive of the value of business school faculty research. As the popularity of studying business grew, especially in the United States, US business schools became cash cows or revenue generators for their universities. Revenue contributions by business schools raised the tolerance of them. But the need to project and protect legitimacy remains, and quality, scientific, rigorous research published in recognized quality journals is a very important part of that effort. Journal quality is used as a specific metric across all levels. At the university level, we know that publications in quality journals is a significant factor in promotion and tenure decisions, faculty hiring decisions, and perhaps even securing resources from external constituents. Likewise, business schools and departments use journal quality as a factor in evaluating individual faculty performance, which of course influences compensation. And again, it's a factor in promoting and tenure, hiring and allocation of resources, including teaching responsibilities. Even departments' views, the way they view each other, is influenced by the quality and quantity of faculty members' publications. And at the individual level, faculty members use journal quality to evaluate each other and to create marketability. Some contributions are specific to a school, for instance, school or university service or idiosyncratic teaching evaluations. But journal quality and publication proficiency is often used by individual faculty members as a common standard, especially if they desire to move from one school to another. Journal quality becomes a common metric across which others measure us and we measure ourselves. We not only accept this metric, we embrace and perpetuate it. Yet unfortunately, our acceptance sometimes blinds us to its limitations or weaknesses and the difficult work of improving it, which brings me to my next point. Existing journal lists miss important contributions like books and chapters and monographs and cases and other research activity. And journal quality rankings should not be confused with measures of research value and impact on society or business practice. Often we reward publications for publication's sake, rather than imploring faculty members to broaden their reach by speaking to practitioners. Too often we fail to ask the societal impact of the research. And this is a lost opportunity for business schools and for our faculty to reach their full potential and their full impact. Now, AACSB recently adopted a new standard for accreditation. Still present is intellectual contributions of faculty, one measure of which is the quality and the number of publications. But it's also important to present the fact that AACSB has two new standards: impact of scholarship and engagement and societal impact. The importance of using our research to address needs of society and to speak to business practitioners cannot be overstated if we are to project and protect the legitimacy of business schools and the legitimacy of our research. I applaud AACSB for doing more to integrate societal impact into the accreditation process. As business schools, we must do likewise. Journal quality is a necessary but not sufficient criteria to judge contributions. Now, finally, while the list of journal rankings and their quality can be useful, this captures only a small component of school quality. Many deans find overall school rankings very problematic because they are shorthand tools too often used to make judgments by students applying to business schools, or perhaps their parents in the case of undergraduates, or recruiters, and sadly, sometimes even faculty members. Using a shortcut avoids the difficult work of matching or finding the real best fit schools. Students and their parents need to think about fit and not just someone else's classification of the top 10 or 20 schools. Which school has the best fit curriculum and majors or co-curricular programs and culture for them? For hiring companies, which students have the right personality and characteristics and competencies and capabilities for them? For faculty, which schools have the right culture and approach to research and teaching and service for them? A summative ranking using criteria and weights identified by others is not the answer. Journal quality is important, but its use in school-wide rankings can be overvalued, and school-wide rankings can shortcut what should be an involved exercise of matching and fit on the part of constituents to their individual needs. And with that, I will turn the presentation back to our host. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your nice presentation and very clear presentation that we have understood. So shall we go for the next presentation now? I will introduce the next panelist, and he is Professor Nick Beach from the United Kingdom. So he's the Vice Chancellor of Middlesex University. He is a Professor of Management and President of the British Academy of Management. His research has focused on the construction of identity and its relationship to change, leadership, learning, and diversity in the creative industries, health and education sector. He has held visiting chairs in business schools in the UK, the Netherlands, and Australia. He is a Fellow of Academy of Social Sciences, the British Academy of Management, the Royal Society of Arts, and the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and Distinguished Fellow of the Australia and New Zealand Academy of Management, and a companion of the Chartered Management Institute. I'd like to welcome Nick Beach.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's a delight to be here. My name, as you were saying, is Nick Beach. I'm currently Vice Chancellor of Middlesex University, which has 4 campuses around the world. The biggest one is in London, and we have 40,000 students. And our focus is very much on knowledge into action. If I was going to choose a ranking to tell you about, the one I would choose would be the young universities across the world, and we are ranked 2nd in the UK in that particular rankings. But as with all rankings, the important thing is to choose the one that does you greatest service. I'm also president of the British Academy of Management, which is a rather long-lived society. We've been focused on research for many years, but we've now branched out into education to capacity building, and we publish a couple of journals. Just so that people are also aware, I do actually sit on the scientific committee of one of the journal ranking guides, and I've also been editorial board of a number of journals. So the brief that we had was to say something about the system and forms of measurement of research evaluation in geographies, to outline some of the points of current debate, and then to give some personal opinions. And so I'll speak from the perspective of the UK, and some of this actually does apply to Australia and New Zealand. The first and the biggest item is what we call the Research Excellence Framework, or REF. And this is across the whole of the UK, and it's a major exercise every 6 or 7 years, in which all business schools and all subjects across the whole spectrum submit to this process, which then looks at outputs in terms of publications, impact case studies, that is the work that universities and business schools are doing with businesses, with organizations, and in other settings. And lastly, something about the environment within which research is undertaken. So that includes things like provision for postgraduate researchers, levels of income, and so on. And each of the elements of that is then ranked from unclassified, which is where something has gone badly wrong, but really starting at a 1 star up to a 4 star, 4 star being world leading in terms of its originality and impact, 1 star being at a more national level. So that is really I would say, the biggest way and the most significant way in which measurement happens in the UK. But on top of that, there's a whole set of measures that are used, and these are very similar to some of the ones that Edie mentioned just a moment ago. One of those that wasn't mentioned so much previously was around research income, and there's a particular focus on where that income comes from. Journal guides and rankings are used. So the Chartered Association of Business Schools Academic Journal Guide is one, the FT that we've just mentioned. Also things like the Australian Business Deans Council list is used. And those are then put together in various league tables that you'll be aware of. And certainly on the international scale, the ones that use citations, but also have voting for reputation, so this occurs in THE and QS, would be the main ones that are used. So the current debates around those are, when we look at the REF, actually this is a huge effort. It takes the panels who look at each of the areas best part of a year to work through all the materials. There's a very considered approach to it. They read all of the submissions in great detail. So it's very high quality, but it's very expensive, very resource intensive, relatively infrequent. And there is also some debate about the move. So traditionally, it focused mainly on outputs, on publications, but over the last few years, there's been a changing emphasis to include impact, which is exactly what Edie was saying was missing from many of the approaches at the moment. And that's done by looking at a number of case studies where business schools will show evidence to say the research that they've done links to outcomes for society in general, or for particular parts of the economy, or for particular organizations. The second one is around research income. And as I said, there's quite a big attention paid to that, and particularly in science, technology, subject areas, where this is very much taken as a measure of the quality of work. So the greater the income, the greater the assurance that is given to the quality of work of a particular research group. Now, while that is true in STEM, so that's science, technology, medicine, and engineering, it's not necessarily the case in business and management, as you will know. So lots of fantastic work has been done that has been either very marginally funded or sometimes not funded at all. And when we look at the UK figures, the British Academy of Management and CABS have jointly done some work around this, and we can see that around 1% of universities' research funding goes to business and management. So 99% of it goes to other disciplines. And if you look at the students, we are teaching 15% of all students nearly 20% of postgraduate students. So there's a real disjuncture between the quantity of teaching that is going on and the amount of research funding that goes on. And in one recent year, the measure was about £73 million in the UK for business and management research from a university I recently worked for. That was the amount that was won annually just by one university. So that gives you a feel for the disparities there. Journal guides and rankings, and people will be aware of DORA, and BAM has signed up to DORA, which is really concerned about rankings where they're used in a decontextualized way, and particularly where journal rankings are used as if they are rankings of the individual papers or of the individual researchers, whereas they are actually rankings of the journal itself. And so we see that as being highly debatable, but at the same time, people actually use those rankings as ways of gaining jobs, gaining promotion, and so on. And those obviously then move over into league tables, and there's a huge amount of debate around the methodologies that are used and oversimplification, for example, on things like reputation and citation. And so just to finish off with a few points that I would hold myself. So I think REF is a fantastic piece of work, but it is high cost and it's very time intensive. I think personally, there's a really helpful trend towards focusing on not just citations, not just journals, but also thinking about the difference that our work makes in the world and the dialogue that we're engaged with outside business schools. Secondly, I think there is a danger, and this danger has been around for a long time, of isomorphism, in that a lot of dominant journals tend to publish similar sorts of papers. There is a focus on papers. There's much less of a focus than there was 50 years ago on book length work, and working in book length means that you can explore ideas, concept examples at a quite different level. And so I think there is something that we need to take care of, that we don't end up all looking the same as each other. I think there's a danger of overproduction, and that there's a real focus, in order to have a career, that journal publications matter more than anything else, and that they are so demanding to get that we'll spend all our time doing that, and everything is focused around that. And in fact, if you go back historically, great academics of previous generations have produced much smaller amounts of work, but often very high quality amounts of work. So I think there's a balance between quality production and quantity production. I think there's some genuine concerns about equality, diversity, and inclusion. So for example, the sorts of roles that get taken in business schools, and also the way that citations, which look objective, but actually also are social and socially constructed, because of course, people who are well networked, who know each other well, are also cited, as well as on the basis of the quality of their arguments. And there's a gendering of roles, certainly in UK business schools, where you can see more women taking on more of the education-focused roles and more of the pastoral roles, and more men taking on more of the research roles. These are influencing factors that I think we need to be really thoughtful about. I think there's a danger of using these as proxy measures when we're hiring people, or promoting and rewarding them, just to say that the journals that they have published in are great, or that their citations are great. These are indicators, but they're not the end of the story, in my view. And that's why I think actually, and I'm sounding really old-fashioned in this, but there is a place reading each other's work. When we're hiring, when we're promoting, looking at the content of the papers, and doing so on the basis of expert opinion, and doing so on the basis of dialogue and discussion. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Nick. I just wanted to mention that we now in the room, Professor Greg Bamberg, who is a former IFSAM president and also former IFSAM president. And I don't know, given that Professor O'Neill has not been able to join us, I know that it's very, very late in Australia. It's 11 hours ahead, so it's like 2:30 a.m. And so we're really grateful that Professor Bamberg is with us. I don't know, Greg, if you would like to say something.
Well, thank you, and it is very late at night here. I just tuned in to listen to the discussion, and I think Nick has really given a wonderful presentation in a very thoughtful and scholarly way, representing the British Academy of Management, and he's not only the president of BAM, but also a fine vice chancellor at Middlesex University. So I think the points he's made are really quite profound, and that we should consider them very seriously, because many people seem to have rushed into making the mistakes that Nick has highlighted in terms of judging a book by its cover, if you like, judging the quality of an academic or the articles or the research output from academics simply based on the cover of the journal that they're published in. And forgive me, I hadn't prepared anything because I understood that Andrew was going to present from Australia. My only other quick comment would be to endorse the remarks that Nick was making about the shift towards impact, which is an area where business and management academics should be able to excel, given that we typically have very close links with practitioners, or many of us do, and have long worked in close conjunction with practitioners in business and management and government and unions and civil society and so on, perhaps to a greater extent than people in other fields of the academy. So thanks for giving me this quick and unexpected opportunity, IFSAM, and I think it's wonderful that IFSAM is convening these seminars to reconsider the whole issues around what is scholarly work in business and management. So commend IFSAM for this initiative, and looking forward to the subsequent series of discussions in the following webinars. Thank you.
You're welcome, Greg, and thank you for the kind words and for the impromptu remarks. Indeed, you were not, it was not planned to have you, but I thought that given that you kindly join us and it's very late for you, that to give the floor to the Oceanian voice was appropriate, and particularly given your past roles as ANZAM and IFSAM president. So we can now proceed, I guess, with the next panelist, and Devraj will proceed with the introduction, which he does wonderfully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So our next panelist, Professor Gian Mario Verona, is the rector of University Bocconi, Italy. He is a professor of management with a special interest in strategic management of technology and innovation. Over the years, he has collaborated both with Global 500 companies and newly founded setups on matters of applied research. He authored 70 plus academic articles and 5 books. He has been a visiting professor at Tuke School of Business at Dortmund College and a visiting scholar at MIT. Before being appointed rector, he served Bocconi as Dean of the Faculty, Director of MBA program, and Director of the PhD in Business Administration. I welcome Professor Verona.
Thank you very much, and let me say that it is a real pleasure and honor to be part of such a distinguished panel and to discuss such a relevant topic. The previous panelists have already put all the cards on the table, so I think that I don't have many additional things to share. I thought, following also the advice of Xavier, to just tell you something about the conception we have at Bocconi University of rankings and research in general. Two words, like my predecessors, 2 words about my university. Bocconi University is located in Italy, in downtown Milan. It's a university devoted entirely to social sciences. We have been a business school, legal studies school, a political science school, an economic school, and more recently we are of course investing pretty much like I guess everyone in data science and in computer science. the portion of the campus which is devoted to the business school, you may know it with the name of SDA Bocconi School of Management, which is the one which is ranked in specialized rankings related to the business school. This is this newly inaugurated campus in 2019. You can imagine how happy we are in inaugurating a campus at the end of 2019 in front of all our stakeholders. And then a couple of months later, we have been the first in the Western world to be hit by the pandemic, because as you all know, Milan and Lombardy has been the very first area of the world hit on the Western side of the world, of course, by the pandemic. So fortunately enough, things are going much better in these days. We have started back the in-presence teaching, which is organized with a very complicated protocols, but we stream all the sessions where we allow many of our students to be at least in class 1 week after the other. So basically, we have the opportunity to innovate, like we like to say, through digital media, but at the same time, we are also having in-presence teaching back like we did before the pandemic. 4 thoughts, very briefly, like my predecessors, 4 thoughts. I think we believe in rankings. I like to say that rankings are like share price in a stock market. Sometimes they are a little bit biased. They are overvalued. Sometimes they are undervalued. But typically, the fundamentals are more or less okay-ish, I would say. More importantly, we have at least the fortune, like it happens in other sectors and in other industries, to have multiple rankings. So we believe not in a single ranking, but we believe in general in overall rankings. We believe that if you check out your university and your institution across a number of rankings, well, you can get many information that are important. Of course, as the previous speaker highlighted, we are in an intangible sectors, so clearly it's very hard to measure knowledge. It's very hard to measure high quality knowledge. But I believe that the hard work that has been put by people in the field over the years, and even I liked a lot what Professor Kessner said at the very beginning, even the effort of business school in trying to really use a methodology which was legitimized in other sector. I think it's important, and it's something that we should consider as particularly relevant. Overall, we believe that, as I said, rankings make sense. It's very important to read through rankings and to try to understand how rankings are formed. And so we followed very carefully this debate around the survey of Financial Times, which of course is something very important. What about research in rankings? Well, given that we overall, again, as I said, have not a bad opinion of rankings, we believe that it is crucial that research is thoroughly analyzed within the ranking system, because research is an essential part of schools, is an essential part of business schools. We are living in a world which is characterized by an increasing commoditization of knowledge. And we do believe that the core difference between a strong institution and a weak institution is the ability not simply to diffuse knowledge, but to create knowledge. I don't want to use the analogy with the publishing sector and with newspapers particularly, but clearly the dissemination of knowledge that we can have in these days, thanks to, of course, the use of social media and other important tools that in the future will be even more important, generates a fundamental element of competitive advantage. The fact that in order to maintain the quality and the competitive advantages, it's really crucial to continue creating new knowledge. And therefore, we believe that the creation of new knowledge is research in our sector. And so we believe that it is fundamental that rankings thoroughly analyze and measure research. Now, clearly at Bocconi, we give a lot of priority to research. I don't think that we do different things than the institutions that were mentioned in my CV, where I've been a visiting professor for several years at Dartmouth College and at MIT for a couple of years as a postdoc. In general, we are aligned to a system in which, say, citations, of course, are considered biased, but still, you know, the purest measure so far we have to understand specific papers. Some journals are clearly more read and more impactful than others, and even more difficult to publish there. So we classify journals specifically with the article influence score, which is, I believe, aligned to many rankings, including Financial Times. I think that you know, the top journals in the different fields, in political science, in economics, in business, that we consider are not different from the top journal considered by most of the schools. And we provide specific incentives, of course, with respect to publication in this journal and to research, which obtains grants from official important institutions. Specifically in Europe, we have the European Research Council, which provides important grants. Obtaining a grant from the ERC at Bocconi is considered particularly important, because it is also, let's say, a measurement of the visibility and the legitimation of the quality research done by the specific applicant to the grant. Let me go a little bit further in what type of research we believe should be considered in rankings. Well, let me tell you, again, the real issue, so the elephant in the room, I would say, when we talk about rankings and research, is also the promotion criteria of universities. So I think that the importance of journals should be strictly related also to what we do in terms of promotion of our human capital. So of junior professors when they get tenure, and to tenure professor when they become full professors. So I believe that's creating a misalignment between the way we measure research and the system of human research management, which we used in the international system, would be clearly a problem, and that would create a chaos in terms also of development of future generations of scholars. And that's the reason why we believe that rankings should mirror the relevance of journals that we consider important for promotions. And of course, there are other important elements that we have been discussing in many associations. I'm thinking about, of course, the ERM for Europe. I'm thinking about the Academy of Management for what concerns the Global Management Association. But still, of course, measuring impact differently should provide very clear, unbiased sources. And again, it's not simple to find them. And again, we should really, if we want to make major changes, to avoid disruption, and at least to find a way to legitimize the innovations we introduce. Now, as you can see, probably my position is a little bit conservative, but I do believe that there are future challenges that are very important. And let me tell you that I believe that most of the challenges have been brought in by the pandemic. And there are more and more important fields that interconnect with business administration. And I do believe that in the future, the School of Business should incorporate more and more these trends that are becoming extremely relevant for the future of the knowledge developed and diffused within business school. And I'm thinking particularly about three areas. The first one is data and computer science, which clearly represents the big disruption in terms of knowledge creation and diffusion within business schools. Data science and computer science are changing the way and the methodology also with which we do research. The future will be more and more data-driven. We will have the opportunity to have more micro, of course, databases. And, you know, given that there is a field which is called computer science, and not speaking about data science, because sometimes data science is the way in which we name the old school statistics. But let's think particularly about computer science. I think that we could learn a lot from computer scientists. And again, if you think about computer scientists, and I have some computer scientists in my university, and I understand that they measure research differently because, for example, they measure paper proceedings and they don't look at the traditional journal citation in leading journals within their respective fields. So again, this would be, for example, an important innovation which I believe we should consider if we want to embrace the challenge challenge of computer and data science. A second fundamental challenge which we see is geopolitics and the impact of macroeconomics, even in micro decisions in management. And so again, to be more horizontal and to include more and more research that is characterized by, again, not the traditional economics, which we already evaluate probably in business schools, but for example, by political science. And even here, I see a fundamental challenge because political scientists, as you may know, typically evaluate their works more through monographs, through books published in important textbooks. And so basically, again, this is an important difference, which is not currently considered in many rankings, including Financial Times rankings. We are fighting to include the additional, journal, but we are not, in my understanding, considering this important challenge, which I believe will inform substantially the creation of new knowledge in business schools. And the third one, again, and this is strictly related to pandemic, is really all the importance of the broader, society, and specifically, I wrote here health and the world of health, which again, is very different from what we have traditionally studied. And also as ways to measure which are a little bit different. You all know that if you publish in a journal of medicine, the quantity of citation is zillions of times higher than a traditional management journal, particularly if we take specific fields. And again, this thing is a disruption. I have many professors that have studied, making papers during the pandemic of important, even experiments done through the instruments of social science, which have been used also within the field of medicines and have been published in journals like, for example, PNAS or Nature. And actually, the impact is tremendous. So now the question is, should we treat, these publication completely differently, given that they have the same measure, but the way they impact is tremendously much higher. So again, we believe that there are innovations to be undertaken. These are just some examples, but again, the opinion we have is more the opportunity to outreach towards related disciplines that are important to us and not dramatically change the system, but try to incorporate the lessons learned from these disciplines in terms of measuring research and try to, again, create an impact as schools and as overall institutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Barona.
Good.
Thank you it's a very good presentation. And so, Javier, you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Devraj. Grazie mille, Gianmario, and very interesting ideas. I really look forward to the discussion and dialogue later on. Hopefully we'll be able to keep more or less the time schedule, although it's always challenging, I guess, with presidents and deans. Just wanted to take the advantage before moving to the next speaker, given that we are also trying to build a community at the worldwide level, and this is again one of these opportunities. I would like to mention other IFSAM council members in attendance, and I will start with the Italian ones, given that Gianmario has one to speak. Pleasure of having with us Professor Sandro Castaldo, who is the president of the Italian Society for Management, SIMA, and who is also representing SIMA in the IFSAM Council, along with recently appointed Professor Penco, who is also with us today. And so I would like to add to that, we have very strong Italian representation. Obviously, our secretary, IFSAM secretary, Professor Arabella Mocchiaro, and who also joined today our new deputy secretary, Professor Elisa Martinelli. So welcome all of them. Glad, very happy to see you today. And I will also mention the fact that we have in the audience Marius, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the British Academy of Management, also with us. Thank you so much, Madeleine, for being with us today. Very important actor at BAM, as you all know. And we also have from the council, Dhruva Kumar Gautam, who is the other representative of the Nepalese Academy in the IFSAM Council. I think that I'm not forgetting anyone in the council. I will mention other people in attendance later on when we finish the panelists. We have, I mentioned him because he's now telling me that he has to unexpectedly leave. We had Charles-Henri Besser-Desor, Emeritus Professor of HEC Paris, who is also the president of the Human Resource Management Association in France. So unfortunately has to leave. And given that I'm doing this now, I will mention obviously that we are very pleased to have with us Andrew Jack from the Financial Times again with us. So hopefully Andrew will also intervene later on. I think there is already quite a bit of food for thought. And, I guess we can, the next panelist, who is also an IFSAM council member, recently joining the Federation. Devraj?
Yeah, Salma. Yeah, Professor, our next distinguished panelist, she is Salma Tamak from Tunisia. She is the Vice President at the University of Cathays in Tunisia. She was the Dean and the Academic Dean of IHEC Cathays. She completed her PhD at Griffiths Paris Dauphine University in France. Her research areas include social and environmental accounting, international accounting standards, and audit. Her research papers have been published in several international journals. She is affiliated to the League University of Monouba, Tunisia. Thank you. Welcome, Professor Tamak.
Welcome. Thank you, Professor Adhikari. Thank you, Professor Xavier. My presentation will be in French. On behalf of Tunisian Accounting Association, I want to express our engagement as we are honored to join the IFSAM network. Je vais parler de l'évaluation de la recherche.
So I'll talk about the research evaluation
In Tunisia, donc en Tunisie.
in Tunisia.
Et là, je vais parler en fait de deux volets. L'évaluation des structures de recherche et des institutions.
Yeah, I'll try to talk about two evaluations. The first one of the structure and the institution evaluation.
Et de l'évaluation des parcours des chercheurs en Tunisie.
And the second is the evaluation of the researchers' career paths.
Alors, la question de l'évaluation de recherche est une question très importante.
So the question of evaluating the research is very important through the institutions.
Et en fait, en Tunisie, on dispose de deux comités actuellement d'évaluation.
In Tunisia, we have two
national d'évaluation de la recherche.
Committees. The first one is the National Committee for the Evaluation of Scientific Research.
Et qui a été créé depuis 20 ans.
Created
et qui
20 years ago.
De chercheurs expérimentés dans l'évaluation de la recherche.
It includes a very knowledgeable researcher it was created 20 years ago.
Principalement, en fait, cette évaluation, elle se fait tous les 2 ans ou tous les 4 ans.
So this evaluation
de toutes les structures de recherche existantes. Mais il y a aussi l'instance d'évaluation et d'assurance qualité et d'accréditation.
So we have another committee which is the evaluation of quality,
et elle intervient
assurance
en fait,
and accreditation
body,
des
institutions
en matière d'assurance qualité 5 years ago. And it's a body who evaluates
dans le cadre de cette évaluation, en fait, on aborde des questions liées à la production scientifique et à la recherche. Thank you. Alors, je vais parler justement du projet actuel au sein du ministère.
I'll talk about the actual project inside the ministry.
Pour éviter cette diversité d'évaluation de différentes instances des travaux de recherche, et de créer une agence d'évaluation et d'accréditation
So the ministry wants to create a body for all the fields,
objectifs de l'évaluation de la recherche.
Evaluate
la
the
principale
research
finalité de tous ces travaux d'évaluation de la recherche est l'attribution des ressources.
The first element that would make the evaluation
il n'y a pas réellement une
real,
évaluation
it's the
de
resource
la qualité
allocation,
de la recherche elle-même,
and this
mais
would be
c'est
based
des
on the quality of the
en termes de
research.
nombre de publications,
So it would
de
be
nombre de tests
mainly
soutenus,
quantitative,
etc. Donc,
number of
on ne va pas aller en
number
profondeur
of
sur la
PhD
pertinence de ces recherches.
dissertations.
Cette évaluation, elle sert aussi à des synthèses qui permettent donc d'introduire les données pour le ranking
for
et
reporting,
le classement international des universités tunisiennes.
Especially for the international ranking of universities, so reporting to the international instances.
Le deuxième volet, en fait, on va parler de l'évaluation des parcours des chercheurs eux-mêmes.
So the second element is the evaluation of the researchers' careers themselves.
Ces chercheurs-là,
so these researchers, when they are hired,
évoluer dans leur carrière,
or if they want to be promoted in their careers.
Donc, leurs travaux de recherche sont soumis à une évaluation par des pairs, par des jurys.
They have to present their research and in front and before a jury, and this jury is on the national level.
Et donc, ces jurys établissent des critères d'évaluation qui sont aussi malheureusement généralement
and the juries are basing their evaluation on very much quantitative criteria, unfortunately.
Et récemment, en fait, il y a une évaluation qui a permis d'attribuer un nouveau type de prime, la prime de recherche en Tunisie.
We have a new kind of bonus introduced in Tunisia at the national level, which is a bonus given for the PhD supervision.
Alors, les problèmes de toutes ces évaluations, en fait, c'est que les critères
the problem of all evaluations are the criteria are not clear and transparent.
Il y a aussi le problème de manque de moyens du fait qu'on ne finance pas réellement la recherche en Tunisie.
The problem also is the scarcity of resources and which are not really sometimes in line with the research problems.
Et face à ce manque de moyens, en fait, on est confronté pratiquement aux mêmes critères d'évaluation à l'échelle internationale.
Yes, it's a double contradiction here because at the one hand we have a scarcity of resources, at the other hand, so we are evaluated according to international criteria.
Par exemple, en sciences de gestion, on utilise pour l'évaluation des parcours des chercheurs, le classement CNRS,
scholars, we are using international ranking, French ranking, or the Reuters or the ACSB ranking. So we don't have any national ranking integrating our national journals, for example.
Face à cela aussi, il y a un manque de contextualisation des recherches en sciences de gestion.
So it means that that researchers are quite called to not to do research on the context, but they prefer to do research on, for example, databases, etc., that are more accessible for them.
Donc, pour des facilités d'accès aux données, pour également publier dans les revues les mieux cotées,
and because also the context doesn't really allow the publication in good journals, because you have to justify why Tunisia, for example, is important as a field of study, something that, for example, American scholars don't have as a constraint. So Selma says it's easier to work on databases and get published with the international databases.
En fait, ce qui conduit les chercheurs dans les pays émergents comme la Tunisie à reproduire tout simplement les travaux de recherche
It means that researchers in emerging countries like Tunisian one are quite obliged to reproduce the research and not really create a new knowledge from the context.
En fait, tout cela traduit et amène à une absence de reconnaissance et de valorisation des travaux de recherche, particulièrement en sciences de gestion.
So all these because we don't have any recognition of the research, business research in Tunisia.
Et la conséquence, c'est que les jeunes fuient de plus en plus la recherche et on a des formations professionnelles, les masters professionnels qui attirent beaucoup plus que les masters de recherche et le parcours académique.
Are quite quitting the research field and they are going through professional masters, and they prefer the practice, which probably would lead to a job more likely than in the research field.
Si on ajoute à cela le fait qu'on évalue plutôt la recherche dans le parcours et on évalue moins les compétences pédagogiques des enseignants-chercheurs et on accorde beaucoup moins d'importance à ces compétences pédagogiques dans tous ces travaux et formes d'évaluation.
Yeah, another contradiction here points is that we only evaluate research, whereas our real contribution is in the classroom. So we don't really take into account the pedagogical part or for example, the case study or the case writing in the career evaluation. So we are reproducing a model with two sanctions.
Ce qui amène parfois à pénaliser certains enseignants-chercheurs qui ont une réelle valeur ajoutée sur le plan pédagogique et qui ne sont pas ou qui ne rentrent pas dans le cadre de publication voulu par les jurys et les différentes instances d'évaluation.
So all the knowledge created in the classroom is totally forgotten while evaluating the researchers or the professor researcher before this jury, who take into account only this quantitative number of publication and where it is published, etc. So that's why something is getting wrong here.
Merci, voilà.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Damak, for your wonderful presentation and explain the situation of research evaluation in Tunisia. So our next distinguished panelist is Jeremy Cabby, and he's from France. He's the professor of CHI Paris Sorbonne Business School, General Delegate, FNEG Dean, ESC ICN Business School. He was the Managing Director of ICN Business School and the ICRICOM Group. He was responsible for the management of the École Supérieure du Commerce External, ESC, member of the Laureate Group. I think I have pronounced it correctly.
So yes, I'm Jerome Cabby. I am the head of FNEG, French Foundation for Management Education, which is gathering about 85 French business schools, let's say the best French business school, private or public. And basically we are sort of French EFMD or French ACSB, and we are providing services to the community of French business school, including, we will address this, a list, rankings of international journals, but also some other services. We are also providing the entrance examination tests for French business school. We are sort of French-speaking GMAT, and we are training staff and faculty. We've got a web TV where French researcher can present their paper in 2 or 3 minutes for the general public. So the topic, our today's topic is about research evaluation and the rankings. And so I have 4 the questions that I received from IFSAM for this presentation. So the first one is about the current system and metrics in France. So actually, we've got a local list, which is the FNEJ list, because it's my organization which is providing this list every 3 years. We do this with a scientific college made up of the main academic association, the French Marketing Association, the French Finance Association, the French HR Association, and so on. And with different kind of ranks. So from 1+ until 4. For 1+ of 1, there is a direct link with the FT50 list, which we have addressed during the last seminar. Until 4. 4 doesn't mean that it's not a good journal, because if you are not a good journal, you are unclassified in the ranking. Until December 20, the CNRS, which is another French body for the scientific research, not only in management, but in every discipline, was also providing a ranking of economics and management journals, but they are stopped in 2020, and I will explain why, because this is directly linked to our today topic. Our list is much broader than the FT50 because it's about hundreds of journals, French and international, and this list is used by most of the French business school, even if some French business school have their own list, such as HEC or ISEC are also publishing their own list. And I must say, I will address again at the end of the presentation this, but the FT50 list is only for very elite schools, such as HEC. Most of the French business schools are not relying on the FT50 because it's too narrow a list for them to evaluate, promote, or reward their faculty. What are the current debate in the French business school community? 2 main current debates. The one about impact, so it's directly linked to our today topic. So how can we include impact in the ranking on society, on companies, in terms of sustainable development, and how to integrate it, especially in terms of metrics, because we are all agreeing that we need to take into account the impact of our research on society, companies, and so on. But we need some metrics, and this is the most difficult task to introduce this kind of metrics. And we are currently, we'll also discussing this for the next FNEJ list, because we are publishing the list every 3 years, and we are trying to introduce some new impact factor, not the academic one, the Clarivate one. And until now, we got some issue to, as the FT, to find clear and transparent and internationally recognized and applicable to every journal criteria in order to take into account impact. Another very French debate is about French journals, because among the hundreds of journals that are classified, ranked in the FNEJ list, we've got about 50 French journals. When I am saying French journal, it's not only French-speaking journal, because some of these journals are published in English, but the editor-in-chief and most of the editorial board members are French, and they are most of the time linked to the association in the area, like for instance, revue de gestion des ressources humaines for the Human Resource Management Association. And clearly, we are giving a bonus to the French journal in the rankings. So, for instance, if we are applying the same criteria for international and French journal, the ranking of French journal will be lower compared to the one we are currently observing. There is some of collateral effect or subsequent effect linked to these bonuses is that French journals and the editor-in-chief has been, I know that there is some French in the audience, but a little bit lazy in terms of obtaining an international recognition, because as we are providing, and the CNRS was also providing good ranking for French journal, they have not attempted to get Scopus or Clarivate impact factor. And at the end of the day, in terms of international recognition of French journal, it's becoming an issue, because mostly only French academics are publishing in French journals. I am including some academics from Switzerland, Belgium, or French-speaking Canada in this community. Another point that is interesting and close to our topic today is the reason why the overlist, because we were dealing with two lists, as I have already mentioned, the CNRS list has disappeared in December. The reason why this list has disappeared is the CNRS has decided to promote open edition, and also it's linked to the DORA agreement that was also mentioned by Nick late in his presentation. And they have decided to suppress the list, and their injunction is, you don't need list, you need to read papers to evaluate researchers and institutions. I personally disagree with this, because I don't know, we are currently making evaluation every day as a reviewer for journals when we are auditing for EQUIS or ACSB, some institutions. And if we need to read every paper that has been written by every faculty of every business school, I think that at the end of the day, our main job will be to read papers written by others, and it's a tremendous amount of work. And I don't know how we can be able to deal with such an amount of work. In March 2020, we will launch the new the procedure for the new FNAGE list, and we are trying to update our criteria, and especially the impact criteria are on the table. For instance, I have made a proposal. They are not aware. It's to the president or to the chair of a different academy to take, for instance, the percentage of paper that relates to climate change as a criteria to evaluate the quality of the, I'm not sure that quality is the right word, but to evaluate the journals. And I'm asking to all the chair of the academic association to send me some proposal in order to introduce new metric in addition to the traditional scientific metric that we are using to propose such a list. My opinion related to the debate, especially the point that has been mentioned during the last webinar and also today. About the FT50 list, I must mention that most business schools over the world are not directly affected by the FT list. It's more for a very elite school like Bocconi. But even if you are, I have been the dean of 3 different business schools, a public one, a private not-for-profit one, and a private for-profit one. And one of these business schools was EQUIS and accredited, another one was IPAS accredited, and clearly my goal as a dean wasn't that my faculty were to publish in the FT50 list. I was very happy when one of my faculty was publishing one paper, but it was not aligned with the strategy and the mission of my business school. I wasn't focused on this list, but on on broader list, like the FNEJ list, because it was more affordable for this kind of business school. In terms of journal rankings, and we know that this journal ranking exhibit some weaknesses, and these weaknesses has been already presented, and these weaknesses have also undesirable consequences, and we have to address these undesirable consequences. But these rankings are also useful. From a faculty perspective, it's a sort of insurance system. You know the rules in advance for promotion, reward, recruitment, and so on. And this is really an insurance because it means you avoid any discretionary, or not completely avoiding, but you are avoiding mostly any discretionary power of any faculty or of any business school deans. From a dean perspective, it's a clear and transparent system for faculty management in terms of research output, only for this criteria, but this is an important criteria. And also it's helpful to ensure that research is still independent from political pressures. Last time I was quite afraid by a quote from Xi Jinping from one of our Chinese colleagues, where Xi Jinping was mentioning what was a good research. I don't think as an academic that the politicians should tell us on which subject we are supposed to work as a researcher, including in management. The risk associating with no ranking is the discretionary power of deans and or academic mandarins. We call this mandarins in France, and I don't know if there is some German in the audience, but such as chair professor in Germany. Because if you don't have any metrics like the rankings, it means the decisions are only made based on their discretionary view in terms of promotion, reward, and so on. And this is a risk, and 30 or 40 years ago, that's the way the university were working. And hopefully we are no more working along these lines. And I think if we introduce too much qualitative criteria in our decision, then it will be the power, this discretionary power will be back. And finally, this is maybe for me the main issue with ranking. You've got some rankings, French, international, and so on. It doesn't mean as dean that you don't need to use the rankings and to try to align your strategy and your mission, the mission defined along the ACSB guidelines, and the way you are using rankings. Let's say that you are claiming that you are the sustainable business school and you are using at the same time only the 50 list to evaluate your faculty. I think there is a misalignment between the way you are evaluating your faculty and your strategy. And this really is important. If you don't want to be the #1 business school in your country or in your region, you don't need to be aligned completely to the FT50 list, and you need maybe to work with your faculty to adapt a list to your own strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. So you have...
Yeah, merci, Jérôme. I would also like to mention that I just forgot before to say that the screen which says IB, I think stands for Isabelle Bouty, who is the president of the Association Internationale de Management Stratégique and also an IFSAM council member. And I would also want to mention that we have with us Birahim Gay, who is the president of the Senegalese Association for Management Science. So welcome, bienvenue. And I would also wanted to mention the kind presence of Amanda Wilson, editor for Social Sciences of Wiley, who will join us in the next webinar, so for building continuity. So I guess we can now move to the next speaker, and we thought that we will give the floor to Andrew next, but again, if it could be shorter.
Yeah, I'll make shorter. Yeah. So thank you. So I just briefly introduce Professor Andrew. So Professor Andrew is the Dean and Professor of Political Science in the Griffith Business School. So prior to being appointed Dean in April 2016, he was head of the School of Government and International Business and director of Griffith Asia Institute. So before coming to Griffith in 2010, Andrews was associate head in the Faculty of Social Science, Federal University, and prior to entering academia, he worked as a Commonwealth public servant. So I think welcome Professor Andrew for your presentation.
Great, thanks very much, and I will try and be as short as I can. So I'm here in my capacity as a Dean in the Griffith Business School in Brisbane in Queensland, and as you can see, it's the middle of the night here, so we still have power outages in the middle of the night. What I want to do is talk very briefly about the broader research context in which business and management schools operate in Australia. So we've heard a little bit about the importance of management and business school lists, and I've been quite closely involved in my capacity as a research director in the Australian Business Deans Council in compiling the journal quality list, the ABDC journal quality list in late 2019, which is widely used and which has over well in excess, in fact, of 2,000 journal titles. It's a dynamic list and the ratings go from A star through to C. So I'm quite familiar with the way in which journal lists are used to measure the quality of outputs in business and management schools in Australia, but also overseas. But what I want to talk about in the next, in the next 3 to 4 minutes is the Excellence in Research Australia initiative, or the ERA exercise that's used by the government in Australia to measure the quality of the research produced by everyone, by all disciplines, and that includes business and management disciplines. So the ERA is really an exercise that occurs once every 3 or 4 years. It's administered by the central government here, the Commonwealth government, and all universities in Australia make submissions to the ERA exercise of all of the publications they've produced, all of the research income that they've generated over the preceding roughly 4 to 5 years. That information is then assessed by a group of experts, and each field of research, including fields of research in business and management, are given a rating that spans from well above average at 5 through to a number 1 rating, which is well below world average. So all of this is done by the central government here in order to take the temperature of all of the research that's produced in Australia, and business and management schools disciplines are very much part of that. There's a big debate in Australia about the merits and drawbacks of the ERA system. One of the biggest challenges we face is the sheer workload in pulling together all of the research outputs or submissions, all of the research outputs over the previous 4 to 5 years, plus the work that's involved in undertaking the peer review of these. So publications are reviewed by peers in the social sciences, in the science, engineering and mathematics area. A lot of it's driven by citation analysis, but in our fields of social sciences, a lot of it is peer review, and that is clearly quite a lot of work, a little bit like the, kind of a scaled up version of the research evaluation framework exercise in the UK. So one of the kind of controversies around ERA also is that it tends to focus on individual fields of research at the expense of interdisciplinary research. And we know that a lot of business and management disciplines are engaged actively in interdisciplinary research. So one of the challenges is foregrounding this, in terms of the research we produce, but it's very difficult in an exercise like ERA, which is determined largely on the tracks and the basis of disciplinary fields of research. The current system ERA is under review. Here we're due to have our next ERA in 2023. And there is a big debate going on about whether all disciplines or most of the disciplines should be subjected to citation analysis. Now, that sounds fine in theory, but I think for quite a few disciplines, including those in social sciences, that presents some challenges. So is that going to be field-weighted citation analysis? To what extent does that put us at a disadvantage against the more highly cited disciplines in a lot of the STEM, the science, engineering, and mathematics fields? How do we recognise interdisciplinarity to a far greater extent than it's currently recognised? We want all our researchers to engage in interdisciplinary research, but if it's not being recognised both in terms of research evaluation exercises, but also in terms of career advancement, that is a hard sell. And finally, one other thing I would throw in the mix as well is, I guess, the question of whether we should be using journal quality, the quality of the outlets in which people publish as a proxy for quality, instead of, or as a supplement to, the intrinsic quality of the work that they produce. And of course, that is very much based on peer assessment, but to a lesser extent also on metrics that drive a lot of the journal rankings that we use. So look, I will stop my remarks there in the interest of time, and thank you for your time in listening to me.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. So I think we have to manage the time also. So I'm going to introduce the next our presentators. So next panelist, we have Professor Niharika Bohra. She's from India, and Bohra has been a professor at IIMA since the last 2 decades. She was also heading IIMA Center for Innovation, Incubation, and Entrepreneurship as its chairperson, which was set up in association with the Government of India and the Gujarat government to fund and promote the startup ecosystem. Currently, she is leading the setting up of Delhi Skill and Entrepreneurship University, DSEU, as a Vice Chancellor. Welcome, Niharika.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I think, so let me say the questions have already been shared were how do we measure management research in India, in our geography? So there are two. India is a very large country and there are many kinds of schools. So at the very top level, which is the IIMs, the Indian Institutes of Management, which rate very often in the top 100 list, typically will use the rankings of FT50 more than the ABDC rankings, and so on and so forth, for making tenure and promotion decisions. In fact, now in trying to get into very good ranking, they have also started incentivizing people who've published in the FT50 and so on and so forth. And when we come down to the other schools, which are more affiliated to the UGC, which is the University Grants Council, there is a system which is called the API. There's a score that gets calculated, in which there are many other elements, and the quality of and the quantity of research done is also part of the API. There is a lot of and of course there are the tier 3 schools which are neither part of the UGC or part of the top schools. Their research is hardly ever present, and there's a lot of conversation about measuring research, but there is really not much to do there. In terms of what are the debates, there are many debates around it. For somebody who has been in the management system at IIM Ahmedabad for more than 20 years, I know the fact that when we have started to focus on the FT50 and so on and so forth, it has definitely made faculty not do research that is as relevant to the questions that they are possibly answering in some of their consulting and some of the work that comes their way because we are situated in India. There is a more general aspect of can I do research that is more palatable to the audience that reads the FT50 and publishes the FT50. There's also a lot of collaborations that are happening with professors across the world who are happy to front end some of the research that our faculty do, so that they can our faculty can get authorship, and some other professors can also get authorship in such research. So there is a rat race. Sorry for using the word, but that's what has happened in many schools. So I think there is definitely something that has happened to the culture, and there is something that has happened to the relevance of the research to the context in which we are. If I look at the API, there are other problems because quantity gets measured, quality does not. And in India, we don't have many good quality journals where people are able to publish. In fact, there is research to show that with the coming on of the API, the number of predatory journals have gone up, and there are more than 40% researchers who are publishing in the predatory journals. So it's a complex problem to look at. And while we have many institutes that have ranking and so on and so forth, but I think our problems are very different. Our problems are much more complex and full of chaos and ambiguity. And I think a neatly packaged FT50 kind of a publication does not address some of those kind of problems. And some of these problems can't be researched, published within a year or 2 years frame. And therefore I think that as a researcher in the field, as a practitioner in the field, I think it's something that we worry about. In my new role as the Vice Chancellor of a university which is completely applied, I still am not even thinking of measuring research, because we are in an area where there is hardly any research across the world, and so therefore it's fascinating to be able to think of what kind of research paradigms to set up for a university of this kind. So what I'm saying is that what I've heard from a number of from all of the panelists who have spoken very eloquently, the problems that I think we face in India and among the Indian research network are possibly a lot more complex, and there is always the issue of who reads it, who publishes it, and what kind of questions we are looking at. So maybe I will just stop here, because I know we are at a time boundary, and it will be very good to have a conversation rather than us just presenting our views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niharika. Thank you very much. So I think, shall I speak just a few things about Nepal, how we evaluate research Nepal? Yeah, because Niharika, she has explained so many things, and some of the things are very similar to Nepal also. Normally, what we have the system that university, they have At the time of promotion, they evaluate the publication of our professors. The second thing, that University Grants Commission has developed criteria to evaluate the research of these scholars, and based on that evaluation criteria, university they are evaluating the research work. And regarding the School of Management, so far as the School of Management in Nepal they are concerned, some School of Management is started to evaluate the performance of the professors based on their international publications. So this is not in that very matured stage as we have discussed today, but we are in the beginning stage. But our business school, they are very aware of evaluating these research and publications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you all for contributions. We have now 9 minutes left of our time together, and I would like to propose the following. I have 4 statements, 1 preliminary statement, and then 3 which try to summarize some of the insights or points that I heard. And of course, it won't summarize everything, but what I would like to propose is that we will send this to the panelists to get their reactions to these 3 points, and then we could publish that as part of our conversation letter for this webinar. Is that okay with, yeah? Great. So thank you so much. Let me then start with the first point. It's one of my pet peeves, but I think that it's important because I still hear most of you speaking about business schools. And I think that part of the legitimacy problem that we have is that these schools, our schools, have been too strongly associated with business and for-profit business. And I think we deal with management in the broad sense, and we train people who go corporations, still the profitability, but then we also now have CSR, social enterprises, and the not-for-profit sector, and as well governmental agencies. So I think that we would do a service to our community by changing the name and talking about management, which is transversal. That's my first pet peeve point, which I add to the conversation. Then the 3 points that I heard that I try to summarize, I'll start with ID. I think one of the key issues is research publication format that at least the elite schools have been looking at in the tenure system, which has significantly been diffused in other places in the world, only looks at journal articles and not books. There have been some efforts in France and other places to look at books and their quality. So my question is, if we are to go forward and also take into account books or monographs or textbooks, Mario mentioned, very important in our dissemination work and in the link between research and knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination, in validating the scientific nature of what we teach in management schools, which is based in those summaries in the textbooks, summaries of research. What should we do to actually have also books included in the tenure processes? That would be my first question. Second point, also ID, but being reflected in many other interventions. The standards 8 and 9 of AACSB, societal impact and engaged scholarship. I think that this points out to the multidimensionality of quality of management research. And I very much share ID's concern that the scientific value should not be forgotten in the traditional combination of and relevant. Rigor is for scientific rigor. But then we are being now, I think, in a crisis of legitimacy right? Or challenging the autonomy of management schools in the broader world, we need to justify existence by looking other dimensions of value or quality. And these are the ones that now we have articulated in what I would say was the word relevance that I was so pleased to hear Gianmario still use, because now we have the, I would say, the more impact, which I don't like personally. But so my second question is, if we are going to take at heart the multidimensionality of the quality of management research, how do we articulate this multidimensionality in a single indicator? And I want to draw from Gianmario's very interesting, thought-provoking analogy with the stock market. Yes, but the stock market is a single measure of what the shareholders think, maybe not just economic value, because they might have CSR preoccupations also, or social-emotional value for family firms, but economic value. And I think the challenge for us that we are really it's such a capital market with supply and demand. We're in a much more complex system with a lot of professional logics intervening. So what would be the way? And this links with the FT. Andrew Jack had to leave, but he clearly and very eloquently advocated that somewhat the misconstruction of the FT survey, because he's not only asking about which journals should be included, but what measures of research quality should be addressed. And I think that this is something important, that we should actually be proactive and try to help them, not only them, but the field, in how we articulate these multidimensionality and then coming up with synthesizes. My last point would be about the point that many of you mentioned, but I would start with Jerome and his point that only the elite has adopted the FT list. And that's probably true. But I think that, as many of you mentioned, like Nick and others like Salma, it has permeated the behavior of the other segments in the stratification system. And the elite, as we know, in any field of human activity, has a very high impact on how the rest behave. And Nick was talking about isomorphism and overproduction. And also the decontextualization of research that also Salma so eloquently put forward, right? Because the incentives that the governments and other agencies are putting in producing certain kind of research that appeals to the elite journals is actually reducing the production of knowledge, which is contextualized in different contexts and not just in North America or in the Anglo-Saxon system. So my question would be, if we were to take this seriously, we actually cope with reducing maybe the impact of the elite and making sure that contextualized research and hence knowledge production is still valued and hence produced. I'm here reminded of one of the points that Andy van de Ven, former Academy of Management president and founding editor of the AMD, made in the first webinar. Maybe each country, Devraj and Salma were referring to, maybe each country needs its own list, which would then value more contextualized research, I would say, such as the French have done to some extent for many years. So I guess these would be points, my 3 questions that we will send to the panelists for getting their input and publishing their answers in our conversation letter. I'm cognizant that several of you might have other commitments. It's 1 minute to 5 p.m. Central European time. And so in the interest of keeping with time, I would like to thank you all and thank in particular the panelists, and Devraj, who has done a wonderful job as co-chair. Thank you so much, Devraj. And thank you all for attending. As you know, next webinar will be on March 26th with the representatives from the publishing stakeholder group. Thank you. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Shukran. Grazie
Bye.
mille.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.